Good afternoon / early evening, ladies and gents, and welcome to the final final panel of W.A.S.D for 2022, the inaugural W.A.S.D. Thank you all for turning out. And for our last talk, we have a man who needs no introduction. I've been asking everyone else to introduce themselves, but I suppose I'll introduce you. I mean, Mike Bithell is the BAFTA-winning creator of Thomas Was Alone, Volume, John Wick Hex, several others. what do you let's maybe start with, how have you found W.A.S.D? What's it like to be back at a physical event?
Weird, right? Strange, right? Yeah, it's been cool. It's been really cool, and I think it's been cool seeing just the breadth of what indie has become over the last few years and where it's at right now. I was saying before we were on, because so many of the games here are games that are maybe already out, we're getting it's a really nice cross section of what has happened in the game side of things in the last couple of years, which is honestly the nicest stuff to talk about in the last couple of years. And it's just been really nice to kind of get a sense of the state of things and see all the amazing stuff being made. It's been really cool.
Yeah, it's almost like a sort of chance to catch up, isn't it? And
totally. Yeah.
It's been really good to see as well the indies section being so busy, the indie hall being so busy.
It's the place to be, and that's as it should be. It's been nice.
So, I mean, with that in mind, like, what do you think? I guess we can lean into that a little bit. What do you think is the sort of state of things as we emerge hesitantly from the pandemic? I say that with a degree of caution because, Omicron's all over the place and we've got more infections than ever by that measure. So, but nonetheless, we're doing this. So where are we up to, and what's the state? And like, we just had the BAFTAs, so that's
which was in itself really exciting. Just seeing the number, seeing games like Unpacking and Inscription kind of dominating the conversation in a way. That was really cool. And I think it's been the case for a while that indie has been this space for for innovation and for interesting work. But it definitely feels like we're taking a larger and larger portion of that conversation. I think a lot of stuff is contributing to that. Like I definitely put a lot of that in the kind of the ease with which people can get indie games now. Like it's been fascinating watching something like Games Pass kind of bring in audiences that would not necessarily buy any of my kind of games, kind of checking stuff out, trying stuff out. They're already subscribed, so they try stuff. And a game like Unpacking just, I think, has really benefited from that and found an audience who are completely new to it. And the number of conversations I've had with like friends and family who are not into games enough to really care about what I do for a living, but are kind of starting to play the kinds of games that I would have never expected them to check out. So that's one thing, and I think that's kind of opened the door, and I hope it's that kind of those gateway games kind of get people looking into the space and kind of finding stuff. It's been interesting walking around a bit today and just seeing the range of people who are checking out these kind of games and finding out more. It's very exciting.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The Games Pass is this incredible value proposition for the consumer's perspective, and like removes almost all the risk for trying out new stuff. And there's been a lot of talk in the media. We've put up op-eds and things like, can this make financial sense from the platform holder's perspective?
You're trying to get me to the controversial quote within 5 minutes.
No.
Awesome.
I won't draw you on that. But I wonder. I mean, what does that do for the value proposition from the developer's perspective? Like, is it still good financially to be on Game Pass?
I think people are doing good deals on all of these spaces. I think it changes things. I think it certainly changes the manner in which we pitch games. I think it's changed the manner in which a lot of people pitch games, that you are thinking about the player, of course. They are ultimately the person you're trying to serve on a creative level, but you're also, I think, put in a position where you have to think commercially about the platforms that you're going onto and making a pitch accordingly. It reminds me, I've been kind of obsessed with the television industry for years and years and years, and they were having a lot of these same conversations, around the advent of things like Netflix,
the streaming model,
all of the streaming model, and how that changed the industry. It is kind of that double-edged swords of the excitement of all of the funding that's coming into the space, all of the opportunity to get in front of people. But yeah, you do need to serve both your existing customer, the kind of the person who plays the games, the indie game player, but you are also equally trying to serve the customer, which is the platform or the the thing. And I think that's something that requires a kind of a balancing act. But it's also, I think, something that if you look at where the TV industry is now, those companies that have managed to kind of do both are able to produce really interesting work. And I think that hopefully we'll see similar in the game space. And then, of course, on top of that, as is always the case with anything in games where anyone says, well, this is the future and everything else will die, there will still be people selling indie games for $20, $30, $40 a pop forever because they'll be serving a niche or an audience who's really interested in that stuff. But I think this is now just an interesting specific area of the industry that we can all kind of potentially target as one option.
As long as the demand exists, the supply is never going to go away, right?
Yeah, I was chatting with someone actually earlier about this with, is it Mini-Me, the company that makes kind of, they made Shadow Tactics, and is it Mini-Me? Are they called Mini-Me? Am I getting that wrong? Yes, you're nodding, it's Mini-Me, okay, cool. So they make the exact game that I want, which is Commandos or Desperados, but nowadays.
Oh yeah, okay.
And they're a company making these indie games, and they're able to charge a higher price point because no one else is making them. So for me, well, I mean, some people are making them, but it's a rare genre, so it's kind of something that I can go after. It would probably, I assume, not make an enormous amount of sense for them to launch into a streaming platform where they're kind of, a part of a package deal, because they're going to, basically, in terms of the money they're going to make from me as a player, they're going to get a chunk of my subscription to whichever service, rather than I will happily pay them day one of release a lot more money, because that's a genre I'm looking for.
Yeah.
So it might lead to that. It might lead to more specialization, as well as more product that's more targeted at the streaming places.
It's interesting to sort of compare the streaming model across industries, because as you say, clearly there's some good outcomes available in TV, but in music, it's really, really hurt the artist. And music artists and bands now have to tour. Slipknot said that effectively, because and that's. But you can talk, I guess, a little bit about the differences in the model that's sort of emerging, because in TV you've got competitor models and competitor services. We're going to get the PlayStation version of Game Pass coming up now. So why don't we have to fear that outcome, and why don't developers have to fear that?
I mean, to be clear, we should fear every outcome. I'm not saying that. I think there's a potential risk of that, especially with an oversaturated marketplace, which I would argue that's where music is there's just so much. I've got many friends who are musicians, and they're just competing with a wall of content. And I think that's coming with games. You see how much more accessible the tools are becoming, which is an amazing thing. But it's also a trend towards more games, which brings its own challenges.
It's already a bit of a problem on Steam, right? Like the curation and the discoverability.
But what's exactly, which is interesting. I think one of the key differences right now is with the platforms that are doing streaming. It's not the kind of profit split that you get on a music streaming platform. They're buyouts normally. So people are being paid a chunk of money to put their game into one of these services. That's how it is now. History's taught us that might shift over time. I think what's helpful to us is that right now a video game requires a budget to make. It takes even the simplest, some dumb platformer about rectangles takes years to produce. Or months if you can program, and takes time to get made, takes effort. If you want to put art and music, and there's cost associated with it. Music, the challenge is you are seeing musicians who are used to a very specific, like going to Abbey Road and recording in an expensive studio and doing it that way, are competing with anyone who's got a laptop and who can produce work very quickly. I think in games there is still that discrepancy where the platforms understand that no, we can't get games for free. We have to put some kind of investment in, otherwise there's not going to be a standard. Again, all of this stuff is always in flux and will probably shift over time. So we're always, as studio owners, we're definitely always trying to stay a few years ahead of that and kind of trying to spot where it's going. But for now, I think there's some interesting opportunities. And specifically in the discoverability thing, a game like Unpacking can get seen and be very discoverable because it's right there. As more games get onto those services, maybe that becomes more of a problem.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. To sort of pick up on a second driver, I noticed what you said earlier about how indies are taking up a bigger share of the conversation. I think also something is that AAA its share of the conversation is maybe souring a little bit. You think of recent AAA releases. I mean, Elden Ring is obviously a big exception.
People were pretty keen on Elden Ring.
People were really keen on Elden Ring.
They were very willing to tell me on social media they were very, very into Elden Ring.
And it is brilliant. But if you think of sort of similar tentpole AAA releases, the conversation around them has not been as positive. Cyberpunk, an obvious example. Battlefield 2042, another obvious example. Like, do you think that's... And there may be multiple drivers there. Like these games keep getting delayed, and then they release, and it's clear they should have been delayed further. Pandemic may have been driving some of that. Do you think that's a fair sort of characterization of AAA? Do you think that's part of the opportunity for indie? What do you think else might be going on there?
I think it's fair. I think honestly, I remember having the exact same question thrown at me like, a decade ago. I think there's always these ebbs and flows. I definitely think the pandemic was a big part of it. Like, I think it's, it's very easy to blame the pandemic for everything. God knows I have. But I think the indie space was probably better set up for it because so many of us work from home. So many of us are used to working in kind of the patterns we like to work in. I think a lot of AAA was kind of almost functioning in kind of just in time kind of way.
Yeah.
And I think like most businesses that worked on that kind of structure or heavily relied on physical proximity between the staff, there was that knock on. And I think we're still seeing a lot of that. Then add on top of that the weird kind of problems of graphics cards. Like, how many company owners have I talked to recently who are like, we literally can't buy computers for our staff to produce AAA graphics on because of all of these crypto people using the graphics cards. So there's been a really interesting set of challenges and problems there. That's not the whole story, of course, but I think, if there's a larger than usual number of AAA games that have been kind of disappointing or frustrating to the audience, I do think that's a big factor in it. But I think Elden Ring is a brilliant example that there's still great AAA stuff kind of in the pipeline, and I don't think that's going anywhere.
Yeah.
I do think that we're seeing now indie starting to close that gap even more. I think it was my friend Paul who actually coined the triple I phrase and has regretted it ever since. But indie has been kind of coming up and meeting midway, and I think that's going to continue. And I think you're going to see more and more blurrings of that line of what is indie, what's AAA, which has been forever. But I think that's going to continue as we come up to meet them, and AAA often kind of realize they can kind of lower their budgets and make smaller games to kind of meet us, and that line's going to continue to blur, I think.
There's needed to be a label for that for a long time, hasn't there? Whether it's A grade or double A or batteries.
They were trying to get quadruple A going at one point, and I was like, that's amazing. It's incredible.
But I mean, do you think these how transitory, I suppose, do you think these forces are? Like, we're obviously, like I say, we're not out of the pandemic, but hopefully we're getting there. And the graphics card thing, who knows when that's going to end? When crypto mining stops becoming fashionable? Like, what
it was never fashionable. Let's be clear.
Quite right.
It was never cool.
Popular then,
Popular
not the same thing. How do you see an end in sight for all these sorts of forces? When will things stabilize?
Yeah, everything ebbs and flows, and that's the awful thing about having a game company for a decade is you notice just everything's transitioning. I think there is a very human need to declare the end point of history all the time and to say, well, this is just how it is now. And I think the reality is that ultimately everything is always changing. I think what's really interesting is AAA is definitely, they're paying lip service to the idea of changing their cultures and improving kind of their work patterns to be more worker friendly. There's a lot of a big push for that, and a big push again towards what I would classify as kind of slightly better working practices. That's going to have an impact. We don't know yet which way that's going to go or how that's going to play out. There's always things coming up in the pipeline. There's also just a massive amount of acquisitions and money flowing around, and it'll all have changed in a few more years, and we'll be asking a whole set of other questions. It never stops. That's basically that's the subtext.
It's change is constant. I feel like we're drawing. We were talking earlier today with Joe Brammer of Bulkhead and a couple of other devs about the changes in working practice that people have been obliged to make as a result of the pandemic. And even if the pandemic goes away, like a lot of those lessons are going to stick around because people have learned, how important it is for individual employees and their particular needs to work more flexibly. The technology is there to enable all of this now when it wouldn't have been 10 years ago. Do you think your studio's always been remote, hasn't it?
Which is weird. That used to be so interesting. Everyone wanted to have a conversation with me about it. How do you work remote? And now it's just no one cares. We're not cool anymore. But yeah, we've been remote forever. So for us, the biggest change during all this was actually, which as with all these things, these should be really obvious points, but sometimes it takes you a little while to get them. What we realized was how much we relied on everyone else not working remote. Like it was all of the infrastructure that basically us working remote felt like a cheat mode while the rest of society was working as normal. And then the second that everyone started working remotely in the game space, that's where some interesting kind of challenges came up for us. We realized, I think as the tech industry usually has to realize that we were much more reliant on infrastructure than we knew, and I think that was interesting, kind of accommodating that, and also just accommodating the changes in people's personal lives. Everyone was going through, and still is, I think, is going through like existential crisis on like a daily basis. No one's okay. And that's okay to kind of say that out loud and to be aware of it, and kind of to factor that into your thinking and the way you run a company and the way you interact with people. Like, it's okay that this isn't over. Like, we're all still dealing with it, and a lot of people are trying to tell us it's over and we're all back to normal, but it's not, and it's okay to be okay with that. And I think that's playing into our thinking going forward.
Sure, and there's definitely a way for companies to sort of navigate all these challenges, but what it has done is it's made clear that my needs as an employee and as a worker or a developer are going to be different from yours, going to be different from a third person's. Some people want to work from home the whole time. Some people love the office environment. Some people want to mix the two. And
usually you love the one you're not currently doing. That's been my experience, especially we've been doing a lot of hiring lately, and it's people who are currently working in the office really want to work remote, and people who are working remote really want to get back to the office.
Well, we've seen the same at NetworkN and PCGamesN, and our approach has been to adopt. We had 3 offices, small ones. We've let 2 of them go, and we're now we're offering some space in the main one on a hybrid basis for people who want to come in. I feel like that's a good compromise, but when you're a certain size and you have employees who have all these different needs, that's an extra challenge, isn't it, for developers and larger studios in particular have to cater to lots of different preferences. Do you see any particular challenge? Is there a solution to any of this, or is it?
I mean, as in most things, I think indies can often create the illusion that we're better at this stuff just because we have to deal with it at such a smaller scale. Similar to the writing thing, like people always, one of the questions I get asked a lot is why is the writing in indie games so much better than AAA? First of all, I don't fully agree with that statement, but also it's because there's only 10 of us. Like we can just talk about what we want to do, and probably the studio's owned by someone who likes writing, so that has an impact. Often when you're smaller, problems, some kinds of problems can be massively more scary and difficult to work with, but they tend to be the more mundane day-to-day things of like just running a company. The stuff that's actually much easier is compassion and consistency and kind of trying to, work well together and look after people. Those problems at smaller scale work really well. So for us, it's just about listening to the people who work for us and checking in with people and talking about what they need and trying to accommodate. And that's, I'm always big on the communication thing, kind of boring on that. Like, I just want to talk about what people need.
Yeah, I mean, it came up in the earlier chats, and I don't want to sort of necessarily rehash it all here. If you'd like to catch up on them, the video on demand will be published in due course, and you can catch up on all the talks from W.A.S.D. But proactive communication and sort of noticing a little, and maybe starting conversations as well. Noticing little warning signs. I love that that's the
conversation now. Like, I love if there's one kind of positive to all of this. Like, I did a panel at Develop that was, I can't remember what the title of it was, but something like indie inspiration genius something. It was I didn't choose the title. It was kind of like highfalutin, aren't indies great kind of a title. Right. But it basically ended up with four kind of studio owners on stage talking about how they wanted to make sure their staff were okay and thinking about their feelings and that emotional intelligence. It's kind of cool that that's now that's a conversation I think all of us have had to deal with growing up, frankly, with emotional intelligence and all this stuff. And I think that's very promising that's the kind of conversation people are having. I'm pleased to hear that's happening here as well. It's really cool.
No, absolutely. I mean, another sort of useful lesson was sort of noticing, because some people aren't comfortable starting that conversation themselves, so the onus is on bosses and managers to sort of notice maybe little warning signs and hints and sort of start that 100%. Conversation.
And we don't always get it right. It's worth saying, like, there's no perfect, there's no one's perfect at that. Like, we're all figuring out together, and there are times where it works well, and there are times where it doesn't work well, and you've kind of got to just kind of grow and learn from all those experiences.
Yeah. I'd like to turn briefly to the BAFTAs. As a former winner, what did you make of the show this year and the winners and the nominees? What do you think they indicate about the sort of design trends in game development more broadly? Yeah.
I was fascinated. I thought, as I said earlier, I think Unpacking, was it 3 awards? I think Unpacking won.
I think it was. Yeah.
That was really interesting. Specifically, the thing that fascinated me was that I think they won the audience award, and that was a moment that really kind of stood out to me. Specifically, it plays into what I was saying before of like, wow, people played that game. Like, Thomas Was Alone won some BAFTAs, but like, Thomas Was Alone was not widely played at that scale, and kind of I said BAFTAs. There was one BAFTA, Mike. Chill out. but like it's I do think that's telling that like that basically the popularity award went to a game which would never have like previously kind of found that scale of audience. That was really interesting to me. I love that Inscription won the design award. I was actually on that jury. I think that's very interesting to me just as a designer, just that we are, as a medium, I think Inscription more than most is a game that breaks out so many design patterns that we have kind of as a...
Very deliberately, yeah.
Very deliberately, very intentionally, like, and I'm definitely, I've released a lot of games in that old school approach of like, let's work out 5 mechanics and then let's milk them for all they're worth, and just repeat and iterate and find interesting twists on those mechanics. Whereas Inscription goes, now we're just going to throw out the game you were playing before, like a bunch of times. That's really exciting. That felt like a moment of innovation. And of course, there are other indie games that have done that previously, but that was one of those crossover games that kind of stood out. So that was really important. I think those were the two big things for me. How about yourself?
Well, I mean, I'd agree. Like we had Daniel Mullins and we had the Zaum guys. And we had Oliver from Hazelight on the sort of BAFTA tie-in panel, and we talked, very deliberately about the sort of. It was a little bit of a challenge for me. I was trying to find some commonalities between those 3 games, just so we had something to talk about. And
you use a controller. Or a mouse and keyboard, yeah.
Well, a little bit of a sort of a dark aesthetic was one that I sort of just about managed to get with. But like, yeah, confounding expectations, sort of setting them up and then subverting them. And I think, well, I guess relationships as well and sort of discovery, like, I guess that's universal. Is the deliberation with which Inscription sort of upended things was what I found so arresting about it. So I'm really glad to see it do so well. On that, if there's a sort of a commonality to be found in your work, maybe it's, I put this to you on email. I was quite glad to see that you basically agreed. Sort of telling stories in new ways might be a reasonable attempt at running a thread through it all.
I think it's a noble attempt. I mean, we've just jumped around all over the place. So fair play to you. Like, that's okay. That's a good thread.
Well, yeah, it is tough to sort of you tell a narrative through all of this sort of thing. There's a lot of similar sort of stuff on that theme in the BAFTAs and Unpacking Inscription. What do you think the future holds for this particular enterprise in game design? Because like we talk about telling stories in games, and it's always been done. Well, it certainly the cinematic or linear approach, the scripted approach, has always been strong, but it doesn't make the best use of the interactivity of the medium, whereas like your games do, those games do at the BAFTAs. What do you think there's more to do there?
I think the thing that interests me is the kind of the rise of the the kind of the narrative designer, the narrative director as a specific role. It reminds me, I remember when I first started in the industry, I was a junior designer at a company called Blitz years ago, and my design manager, I kind of, as a daft guy doing my first job, was like, so what's your history as a designer? Like, where did you come up? He's like, I'm the artist who said I'd do it. Like, it was just like, there was no design 5 years ago, Mike. What are you talking about? The idea that there would be someone on the team who was focused on making the game you were making fun only kind of really in a big way happened in most of the games industry in the 90s. In the early 2000s even. And I look at the narrative director and design and just that general field as kind of the next step. It did not occur to people when I was coming up that would be a job. And now I'm talking to people who've specialized, who've gone to school and focused on it, who've maybe done a couple of jobs at this point doing it, or have come in from like another writing context, journalism or screenplays and something else, and kind of found their way into that. And that is exciting to me. Much like early design, they're struggling for respect in a lot of companies. Like I feel a kinship, and especially as someone who has written our games and designs a lot of them. Obviously, lots of very talented people doing that as well. But like, design and writing are two of the most frustrating jobs because everyone on the development team thinks they can do it. It's kind of a very universal. If you've ever, any designer in the room has had an argument with someone about like game design and really had to kind of assert themselves a little bit and kind of go, no, this is my job to think about this. And I hear the same thing from those narrative directors and designers and storytellers. I think that is exciting because that's happened throughout the history of games. If you look at like something like film, you see the same thing of like once the people who've been educated in the medium rather than just been forced into it come in, you get this burst of fresh ideas. You get this kind of really this moment of innovation, just people who've really been able to focus on doing this stuff rather than just kind of solving a problem. So that's exciting to me, and that's got nothing to do with technology. That's just clever people being clever. Well, that's awesome.
Isn't that the difficulty, though? I mean, like I had heard something similar, which is that narrative designers and writers and things, they try and but then, because it's a thread that runs through the entire game, you've got input from artists, input from programmers, input from, and like the writer then has to sort of write around all of those problems and sort of reconstruct the plot, and that's happened. I gather, generalize, think, because the other disciplines are so much harder and like, well, not harder from a technical perspective, but like the assets and stuff and the code is less flexible, I suppose, than like a narrative.
More expensive in terms of its production, more like time. There's a higher time cost associated. I would say that that's historically the case, but I think a writer would say, like, there's an adage within writing that like the bit where you put the words on the paper, that's like the last bit.
Yeah.
That's not the writing. That's the execution. That's plating the dish. You've got to do all the work beforehand to kind of get to that point as a writer. Most of my writing process is done on like Post-it notes and like talking to myself as I walk down the street to buy a coffee. Probably terrified my neighbors doing that, doing voices, the whole works. Like the writing is yes, there's a lot of thinking and process that's kind of invisible sometimes to other people. I think it's also, just to stick to the not technical side of it, there's also just the procedural process of what you're describing is a production process problem.
Yeah.
And there's definitely companies that allow for better writing. It's a really interesting correlation I like to point out is the correlation between companies game development studios from AAA to indie who have released games that are, great stories, like just well regarded for their storytelling, and the relative seniority of writers in that company structure. A lot of companies that are very respected for their storytelling happen to be run by writers, and that's kind of a shortcut, right, to getting that respect within the team and that respect from the production process. So it has to be accommodated. What you're describing, that kind of interlocking dependencies, that's all game development. All game development is a sequence of people waiting for someone to finish something, and there's the wasteful way of doing that, which is kind of a free-for-all, but there's also like great producers who will step in and kind of go, no, we need to do this now, and then that will lead to that, and then that will lead to that, and we've got to put some space in there because Jim always takes longer than he says he's going to take, so we've got to allow him to do his thing, and then that's going to, like, that's a skill, and I think that soft skill, and even the phrase soft skill kind of often is very dismissive of that person who's kind of keeping everything running, you know. We're very quick in games to prioritize the technical job and say that that's the important, tricky, challenging part, and then kind of disregard a lot of the other stuff. I think one thing that just is increasingly becoming something we're talking about is all the other things are actually really important to getting stuff done efficiently and well. And I think, yeah, as story is more respected in the same way as art and code had to accommodate design back in the day, I think the same thing's going to kind of happen here. And then once that's working well, then everyone can become involved in it, you know, and you have like artists suggesting really cool story ideas and the narrative director kind of incorporating that in, and you can kind of get that flow, but that requires a structure that's working. The train has to be running before you can kind of optimize it.
I guess the challenge is that, you know, as, you know, story and narrative design becomes more and more respected and like less overruled, you're adding another cog into the machine that has to intermesh with all the others, so it gets that much more.
Yeah, and like everything, it always as well comes down, we're doing a bunch of hiring at the moment, and one of the things we keep coming back to is how important kind of communication and compassion are to, like, in terms of people we're talking to, like in terms of like hiring like someone who's maybe technically less skilled than the other person, but they're so good at communicating that you know that they're going to be able to work better in a team. Yeah, those skills are becoming more and more important, I think, across the industry, because our tech is good now. Like, there's still stuff to be worked on, there's still stuff to be using, but like the engines are really good and really optimized. It's starting to be the people that are like the optimization we have to make next. Of like, how can we be better to each other and work better with each other to kind of keep this thing rolling?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's good to hear that, you know, that aspect of communication is like it seems like the best solution, right? That you, as this is not just a question of like finding a producer who can sort of, crucial though that is. Do you have any, you know, thoughts on the potential of procedural storytelling? Or, I mean, I kind of wanted to explore a panel maybe for the show that would. Ken Levine has been in the press recently for, you know, talking about.
Story bricks, right?
Story narrative Legos.
Narrative Legos, that's the right.
And actually, you know,
I removed the trademark. I'm thinking ahead.
I didn't want to frame the panel in terms of that, because actually indies have been making a ton of great progress on this, which needs to be acknowledged. Like Wildermyth is an example that, you know, you'd go to. What are your thoughts on the potential of that kind of approach to story? Do you think it'll ever get as good as scripted stories, as rich?
Oh, for sure. I think it's different. I think ultimately, I think there's, you know, there's different kinds of stories, as there always have been. Like both can coexist. I definitely want to read a very well-authored book or watch a director with a vision make a movie, but I also want to go to a theme park and have like story blasting at me from all areas and kind of deciding which bit of that I'm going to engage with and what I'm interested in and which corner I'm going to walk around. I think we've historically, and there's a whole set of, we can go into the psychoanalysis of why we've done this, but we've definitely spent years trying to emulate movies and TV and stuff like that. And that's one kind of storytelling, and that is very valid and still will exist and will still make stuff. But yeah, the broader description of storytelling, which is like, you know, architecture, telling a story through a space, telling a story through an interaction, telling a story through, you know, around a table in a pub, you know, there's a million other ways of telling stories. And I think, yeah, procedural is a really interesting part of that. What we need to be very careful about, and I think where we need to really communicate well with players, is that procedural doesn't mean random, that it doesn't mean just kind of chaotic, throwing darts at a dartboard. It's much more, it's a very skilled dart thrower. What's a professional dart person called? I don't know. Well, there must be a name for it. They're not an archer.
Yeah.
That would be cheating. A darts player. It's like the best darts player in the world throwing a dart at a dartboard. And I think that as long as we can kind of express to the player that there's an authorship to the way this procedure is working, I think that's going to be really powerful. I think that's a tricky one because I think the audience still thinks of procedural generation as randomness. I think a lot of developers still think of procedural generation as randomness. I'm interested to see how we can evolve that. It might be that the words procedural generation are too complicated and we need to move away from them, that they have too big a meaning.
I also don't think it corresponds accurately to what like this particular sort of form of procedural storytelling really is. It's not just a question of like, you know, a block coming up, but it's well, yeah, I don't know that we can. Yeah,
I worry that people think we're talking about the holodeck, and we will get to the holodeck hopefully one day. We'll probably be dead, but like other people will have holodecks in the future. But there's a lot of steps between here and there. You know, and I think that'd be interesting to see.
We haven't talked about what you're getting up to, and I know that you can't talk about your.
Well, let me tell you the next 3 years. Let's go through it. Every press release early. Yeah.
I know you can't talk about the sort of game that you're working on right now, other than that it's cool. I was just assured.
Did I give you that quote?
Yeah,
I did. Okay, cool. It is cool.
But you've just launched a podcast, which I gather is going really well.
Oh, Play, Watch, Listen.
Yeah.
We've been doing it for, I don't know how long. We're at the 100th episode. That's only because pandemic happened. So it was meant to be like once a month, and then we had nothing to do, so we just did it weekly. So yeah, it's been going really well. Yeah, it's weird. It's kind of blown up and found an audience. People have been yelling quotes at me as I've been walking around today. It's been interesting.
What do you get up to on it? What's the format? What do you discuss?
Oh, it's just well, so my role on the podcast is mainly to forget I'm on a podcast. That's my job. It's just stop me if you've heard this before. It's four people having a chat about nothing. It's every podcast. Like everyone, we decided to do a podcast. So it's myself, Alana Pierce, who's a video game writer, Austin Wintry, who's a great composer, and Troy Baker, who's a great actor. And Alana's also great. I don't know why I put the great on for them and not her. She's also great. And then me. So it's kind of a nice, weird spectrum of different people from different parts of the games industry kind of just chatting about stuff.
That's an awesome lineup. I did not know that. I will listen. That's terrific. Thank you. We can turn now to questions from the audience if anyone has some, and I will switch over to Twitch. If you are watching on Twitch, I gather there are already 1,000 viewers.
Hey, 1,000 viewers.
Hey, 1,000 viewers.
Where's the camera? I want to wave at them.
In the back there. Give them a wave.
Hello, hey.
Please do
subscribe.
Please do drop stuff in the chat, and we'll ask it. But if you're in the audience, we'll have questions.
Yeah, there's a mic in the middle. Are they running to it, or is the mic coming to them?
Yeah, if you could, you sir, in the stripy top, if you could go to the mic of a phone and
get a queue forming, or
do line up behind your man, and
oh no,
gosh,
this is scary.
Good stuff.
Cool. Hi, thank you for the talk. This is my first convention I've ever been to, so it's been really positive. My question is that as someone who's had such an interesting career in terms of the scope of it, you went from making games about rectangles, and now you work with John Wick, this major IP.
Which is here, which I didn't know about.
I played it earlier, it's fantastic.
That's very kind, thank you.
I'd be interested to get your opinion on what lessons, I guess, you'd give yourself 10 years ago, without putting you on the spot, or perhaps, how those early games might have been different, if at all, knowing what you know now about the industry and yourself creatively.
It's a really good question. Oh, I made so many mistakes. You're welcome. You're welcome. Oh gosh. I think the biggest one probably was, so Thomas Was Alone was just obviously an accident, and I think I've said that so many times on stage, because everyone always wants you to pretend that oh yeah, I totally knew what I was doing. Yeah. I was rectangles, that's the future. No, it's just a game I made that kind of blew up and set us up and let us build a company. But I think after Thomas Was Alone, going to Volume, which was the next game we made, which was a stealth game, which was kind of me doing childhood wish fulfillment, so Volume is it's a stealth game. It was basically me just doing the Metal Gear Solid game I'd always dreamt of, and I was kind of just this is my opportunity to just do whatever I want. And I think I could have made Thomas Was Alone 2. That would have probably been a better second game to make. I put a lot of pressure on myself to make that game. I think there was also that expectation, or that that feeling that it was just gonna, it was gonna be, a game that was even more successful than Thomas Was Alone, and the next one would be more successful. I think what I've realized over the last decade is that we can have a more sustained version of success where we can kind of make stuff that's consistently doing well, but it doesn't have to be that exponential kind of curve. And that's been something I've definitely come to. I'd like to have taken that kid to one side and been like, so everyone really likes Thomas Was Alone, and you're gonna make more games that everyone likes? But, it's going to be a range, and it's going to be kind of ups and downs and stuff. I think just an awareness of kind of the challenges of 10 years, basically, would have been really helpful.
Yeah.
And I definitely always give that advice to people who've made their first big hit game to go, okay, this is a lovely moment, use it, but, it's going to be ups and downs.
Cool.
Hey.
Well, so I had a very big discussion like a year or before pre-pandemic with a colleague in the studio about procedural generation not being only randomness. And you just said that, and I would like to record it to send it to him because I wasn't able to.
Did you lose the argument?
No, it was a never-ending procedural generated argument. So.
Oh, I see. So it was randomized then, there was no outcome. So you just want me to say, what's your name, sir?
Diogo.
Diogo was right.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
That was it. Thank you.
Outstanding.
Test? Okay. So this kind of goes off the first gentleman's question, but with a slightly different tang to it. One thing I found over the past few years of doing my own projects in my free time is every project just kind of has one big lesson you learn from it, and that's what sticks amongst all the 1,000 other things you learn along the way. So I'm curious, over the past few projects you've done, maybe pandemic or before then, what big persistent lessons do you have stuck in your mind?
That's a really good one as well. That's a really good one. I have to decide the level of honesty and then glance my business partner in the audience and see which level of honesty I should go with. Hey, Alexander. Because there's 1,000 people watching Alexander. I could get us in a lot of trouble right now. Goodness me. I think we've definitely learned to be honest about what we want to make. I think that's been a big part of it. So something like Solitaire Conspiracy, which was a game I made over the pandemic with a very small team, because most of the team was working on Arcsmith, which is a VR project we're really proud of. That was like the most fun I've had making a game in a long time, because we were just messing around. We were just figuring stuff out. There was very little pressure. It was kind of just an opportunity to just kind of express ourselves creatively. And I think you can get into the process when you're making games of kind of trying to serve, the publisher, the platform, the audience, and those people all really, really matter. But I think that was a project which reminded me why I got started making games, which was entirely selfish. And just wanting to make stuff I was proud of and that my team was proud of and that we could kind of work on together. And I think that's probably the most important lesson I've learned recently.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
We have only time for 2 more questions because we have to wrap. 1 more question, I'm sorry. Young man, please.
Hi. Oh, my voice sounds horrible. Sorry about that.
Everyone does. Don't worry about it. That's normal. You're fine. You sound great.
Thank you. So I came here having no idea what this was. So I just not this talk, but this festival thing.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So I've tried every game here, and your game, the John Wick game, was by far my favorite.
That's very kind. Thank you so much.
So I'm beginning to make games myself, and I love to make a game like that. So I'm just wondering, what inspired you to make that game, and how long did it take you as a team to make?
Thank you. Yeah, and you should make games. You should absolutely make games. They're great to make. So with that one, what inspired me was really lucky, actually. We were interested as a team in making something that was about the tactics of kind of action movies and stunt teams and stuff like that. So we were kind of already kind of talking a bit about those ideas. And then, in an awesome, miraculous coincidence, a friend of mine was a producer, a publisher who had the rights to make a John Wick game. And I was just ranting at this guy, bless him, about how I wanted to make a game about action and stunt choreography. And he was like, well, I've got John Wick. And we kind of put that together. So basically just luck. in terms of how it came about. In terms of making it, it took a good couple of years. It was really fun, and we got to work with the people who made the movies and kind of bounce ideas off of them. I got taught stunt choreography by like that team. I got to learn how to shoot guns, which was awful. I never want to do it again. It was a bit too fun. But yeah, no, that was a really fun learning experience of kind of learning how those movies are made. And I was a big fan of them, so I just honestly, it was like the best like behind the scenes documentary ever, because I got to go and ask my questions of them. So yeah, really cool process. You should totally make games and make stuff that's small and cool and that you're proud of, and try and finish it and then make other things and just keep that process rolling. When I was about your age, I was making little games. They weren't very good, but I was really pleased with them because things happened. There's nothing as exciting as writing a bit of code and having something happen on the screen that you made. So yeah, definitely do it and keep doing it.
Wonderful.
That's really cool. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. What a wonderful, inspiring note on which to end. Thank you so much. And thank all of you guys for coming. That's a wrap on WASD 2022. We will be back again next year, but thank you all so much for coming out and taking a punt on physical events again. It's been brilliant to have you all here. Have safe journeys home, please, and give a big round of applause to Mike Bithell.